Well, thanks again for meeting with me, Eli. Like I said, I'm kind of feeling like a fanboy right now, and I'll try to bring you down a couple pegs in my mind according to the disclaimer that you gave me, but it's going to be tough.
No, I'm so glad to be here. And, one of the cool things I think about both LinkedIn and Twitter is just the chance that we get a chance to meet and then connect
hmm
here. And that's kind of cool. It's hard to do when you're not in person. And now we're back to
Yeah.
being in person, but yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I have a bunch of questions
Yeah.
that I'm sure we won't have time for all of them, but kind of starting off, as you mentioned, I've been following you for a while now on Twitter and LinkedIn, and it sounds like if someone has questions about venture capital, startups, or Flemish primitives, then you're the guy, right?
Yeah, that's right. The third one I don't get as many questions on,
Sure.
but yeah, exactly.
I had to look up what that even meant, so now I know what it's referring to, but you've educated me on that. So anything else people can come to you for advice on besides those topics?
No, I think those are the three big ones.
Okay.
Yeah, been really just grateful to work with founders, for all of my career.
Mm.
And I think that's super cool because I'm not a founder myself. I'm the boring side of this, which is a VC. But I just find it super exciting whenever I get the chance to chat with like people working on cool stuff to change the
Mm.
world.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. And what were you doing before Character?
Yeah, so prior to Character, I was with a Midwestern-focused VC firm that was based in Milwaukee. It had some elements of a family office in the sense that there was a father and son that I worked with quite closely, and another partner. And they were really focused on B2B SaaS startups in the Midwest. And I had this wonderful opportunity that they afforded me through that role to start out as an intern, directly, when I was still in college, and
Mm.
then join as an analyst and doing everything from getting coffee to the grunt work to taking notes to eventually reviewing all of the companies that came through
Mm.
our screen, and then becoming a general partner in the third fund, which was a $50 million entity, again, investing at seed and series A and B2B SaaS companies in the Midwest.
Mm.
Yeah.
Great. Very cool. And how did you meet John Zeratsky?
Totally by chance. So I like to say it's the best thing that's happened to me through Instagram, and I don't even have Instagram. Um, my wife runs an interior design business, and when
Ah.
John had left Google Ventures, he took some time off and did all this really cool sort of work and sailing through a whole bunch of different places. And then they decided that they wanted to move back to Milwaukee, and
Mm.
they found my wife on Instagram because she runs an interior design business, and they used her services and her company to fix up their condo.
Mm.
One day she was chatting with them and she was like, by the way, like, what do you guys do? I've been working with you all these months. And John said, I used to work in venture. My wife was working in a biotech startup in San Francisco, and she was like, no way, you should be my husband. And then John and I
Wow.
hit it off. So just truly one of these weird things that arose from just happenstance.
Yeah.
Thank you, Instagram. Like,
Yeah. Wow, that's incredible. And that, I assume, explains your incredible background. Did your wife help you design your office there?
exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. 100% of the credit goes to her. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Thank
just
you.
striking.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. No, Jerica Zurich Interior Designs. Like, she did me right.
Very cool. Yeah, I love that. Wow. Um, and one thing I was reading the article that John wrote about you guys starting
Yeah.
Character, and one thing I would quote from that was he said that when you two had a lot of your conversations leading up to starting Character, he said that he said Eli shared his experiences as a traditional startup investor, where he often joined company boards and supported founders with coaching and advice, but he saw the limitations of that approach and told me that value add can easily become value destroy
Yeah.
when you're not working hand in hand with the team. So I'm curious, as I said, I'm kind of a fanboy, but for those of those of this audience that aren't as familiar with character, how does character do that, work hand in hand with the teams?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to start at the end, it's all based on Design Sprint, which my co-founders Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky had created at Google and then Google Ventures, and used as a process with a lot of GV's really cool companies like Slack, Airbnb, Uber, 23andMe, to help them quickly test and iterate on product market fit. And the way that they did it was this 5-day process where it's sort of like the lean startup on steroids. You don't try to get to a working prototype, but you work collaboratively in this really cool process, alone but together. You get to a mock-up of a prototype on Thursday, and then you do 5 tests with like potential customers or users of whatever you've worked on during the week. And you just get really amazing results in 5 days versus like months and months and months of work. And that's sort of been the default mode for how many startups think about like how they build. You know, we have an idea, maybe we'll hash it out, fight between the founders or agree between the founders, and then you go out and code this thing and you sort of hope it works. But there's a way to get signal much faster, and it's through this design sprint process. I think, you know, one of the struggles that I saw sitting on boards is that as an investor, you know, we're minority shareholders as venture capitalists. We're not taking majority stakes. And so that means that we're not sort of replacing the whole management team and like going on the ground and trying to be operators ourselves. You know, we're really in the position to support and help founders grow. But it's hard to do that, especially if a founder has really big questions or, you know, something's going wrong, because there's not a really good mechanism to sort of interact with a startup company as an investor. You know, even if you had a big exit as an operator previously, you know, 10 years ago, like you sold some amazing company to one of the big tech companies, like your skills as an operator, those port somewhat to your portfolio companies, but you can't multiply yourself. You know, you're not in the current market and you're not running those teams. So you have to be an investor, and it's hard to sort of strike that balance between actually, you know, helping companies sort of figure out their next steps without being so intrusive as to like make things worse, which unfortunately it's very easy to do.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And part of the reason that I found you and found character is I worked at, I don't know if you're familiar with Thomson Reuters.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So I worked there for about 10 years, ran a couple different design sprints at various times. And it was just an instant fan of the book and the method. And that's really my background, is as a facilitator,
So cool.
primarily. And so I've seen evidence of it. And the sad thing is that when I got the first opportunity to facilitate a design sprint, our research and evidence was basically mothballed for like a year. And so there was so much wasted toil that resulted. But then the product did get put out eventually, and there was organic revenue growth. It was fantastic. But I just thought, you know, if we had done this a year ago, right after, that would have been amazing. And that's kind of why I've really just dug into talking to you and founders and VCs and everybody in this space, is because I love the energy and the risk and the, you know, just, you know, knowing that we're placing our bets on this, but we're moving fast, we're learning quickly. And so that's a little bit of my background and why I'm so intrigued, especially by the character business model and how unique it is in our space.
That's so cool, man. And you saw the light much sooner than I did. Like, and yeah, I cannot imagine with that big of an organization and just sort of the institutional heft that Thomson Reuters has. I mean, that's an old story, big, successful company. And so not surprising to hear, but it's also very cool that you guys did a sprint at all. I mean, that's it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's great to get the opportunity, and definitely don't look at it as a complete waste, because it was, like you said, that we got to do it at all. We learned a lot. I learned from the whole process quite a bit. So that was great. And so one thing I was curious about, have you ever had to fire a client or had to abort a sprint?
Yeah, I know that at again, this is not exactly my bread and butter, but
Sure.
we've been very thoughtful at Character about when we engage with
Mm,
companies. And so the only times at Character where we've had to like pull out of running the rest of the sprint was when there was an emergency, like,
mm,
founder had some like family member become ill. I think that's the
mm,
only time that we've had to sort of abort. I know that when Jake and JZ were at Google Ventures, that they were very, very intentional and thoughtful about when to run sprints. And so,
mm,
one of the things that they really were trying to focus on was when does the company need it and where would it have the most impact? And
mm,
so, you know, GB, of course, had a gigantic portfolio by the time they left. But they weren't just working with any company. There had to sort of be that rationale and the desire from the company,
mm,
plus sort of their judgment that it would work. So
mhm.
I don't know that they like started one and then decided to pull out, but I
Sure.
know that they were very intentional about how they planned working with companies, as we
Yeah.
did as well.
Yeah. And that's fantastic, because it's great that the fact that there isn't really a clear example shows that there's a lot of preparation and careful thought that goes
Definitely.
into it before you even
Yep.
engage in that way. So that's great.
Yeah.
Nice. Um, so one thing that I would love to learn about, I had mentioned to you that I'm doing a product market fit breakfast, kind of a
Yeah.
mastermind style session at Twin
Yeah.
Cities Startup Week. And I definitely plan to bring some of what we uh, talk about today into that session. Um, so what are some ways that you measure product market fit along the way as you're working with a startup?
Oh man, yeah. Such a great question. Well, I think that the way we've looked at it is that it's not a super black and white, issue. It's not as though you wake up one day and you're like, aha, it's 100% solved.
Yeah.
There's sort of gradations of success. And one of the ways that we measure that is certainly around, the tangible outcomes, the revenue, the users that, companies are growing. But there's also a level of intuitive, I think, feel that we like to measure with founders about how close they're getting to product market fit. And so when we run a company through a design sprint, we often recommend that you should then reserve the next week in case you need to do another one.
Mm,
And with our Character Labs program, we get to see this up close because we run several back-to-back design sprints with early stage companies. And each week
mm,
we ask them to sort of give their percent score that they think they're getting towards product market fit.
mm,
And it's sort of an encapsulation of all of the things that they've learned during the week, and perhaps how the business is actually running in and of itself.
mm,
And sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down. I think that one of the things that I think about, and again, this is not sort of this is not like this is not uniform among the three of us, so I should be clear, this is just my opinion,
sure.
is that when the business sort of has wheels outside of yourself pushing like the boulder up the hill, like when it starts to feel like it's sort of going downhill and you're not the like catalyst that's like just beating down every day, that's when I
Mm,
start to think like, maybe you're on the right track to product market fit. Either there's enough demand from customers, people coming in using the product, that you're not, pushing it all the way
mm,
up the hill,
mhm.
or you have enough of a team and a structure behind you that's able to execute on making those things happen.
Mm,
But that again is very different. And for some people, you never get past pushing the boulder up the mountain, and for
sure.
others, it's not rolling down very fast, and you're at just like a very flat slope, and you actually
Mm,
should have been pushing up the next hill. So it's
sure.
it's not always so clear.
Sure. That makes sense. And speaking of the reserving the following week, just in case you need a follow-up sprint, I was talking to a founder today, Devin Seacrest. He's got a company called Invisible Code Buddy.
Uh-huh.
And you've heard of him?
I haven't, but it sounds
Oh,
really
okay.
cool.
Okay.
It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's great. It's like, I mean, this is this is my like really quick pitch on his behalf, is that it's kind of like pair programming with AI basically, or like it's already set up. And it sounds like it has incredible potential, especially as somebody who's worked with software engineers and web developers for 12 years. I could see there being a lot of potential for it. But as I was talking to him today about the sprint concept and telling him about the 5 days and how you guys work with character labs and even that 4 sprint method, he was like, yeah, I'm wondering how we would do that, because as founders, we're like wearing 12 different hats, and how do we, set aside an entire 5 business days just for that? And so I was curious how you help founders navigate that.
Yeah, it's tough is the short answer. And it's sort of, you have to be at the right place in your company and sort of your ability to multitask, because for those 4 weeks you're sort of doing 2 things at once. I think that the reality is that the way that we work it's not as like disciplined as we would hope, and it's not as focused as we would hope. And so the trade that we ask founders to make in Character Labs is like, here's 100K, and hopefully that 100K, takes care of everything for the month. Like if your burn was 100K that month, like it's taking care of everything. So put a mental note on like a pause for everything that you're doing during that month. And, if you're at that spot where it's like, we need to have really big learnings on product market fit, which many early stage companies are at, by the way, whether they know it or not, like give this a try, and do whatever else you're doing, in the nights, do it in the mornings. Like it's the extra pain, but it's not like so crazy as to not be worth it.
Yeah.
But it's not right for every founder is the reality. Just like YC isn't right for every founder. There's a time commitment associated with changing the way that you work. And if the default's working really good for you, you should keep doing that.
Sure.
Like if it's going great, just keep doing that. But for some founders, like there's definitely like a lot to be gained by trying something new.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny because I was talking to a different founder last week, Max Minikov, who came up with Novoso. It's the snow clearing robot. And I asked him if he's ever done a design sprint, and he goes, "Oh, I hate design sprints." And I said, "What makes you say that?" And he goes, "Well, staying up till 4 a.m. to work on the prototype." I was like, "Well, there's your problem."
Yeah,
I was like, "You shouldn't, if you're doing it right, you shouldn't have to stay up till 4 a.m.
Yeah, definitely.
And I said, that's something that a facilitator like me can help make sure that doesn't happen." And he's like, "Oh, well, that's the other problem, is I was the one facilitating it." So,
right.
And so I think that's, I've told people before about the sprint book too, that start out just following it to a T.
Yeah.
And then you can experiment. It's
Definitely.
kind of the Shuhari, mastering the approach, and then you can deviate from it. And it seems like that really helps people at least understand, am I truly experimenting objectively before I try to change the approach?
Absolutely. 100% agree with that for sure. Yeah.
Great. And you had posted recently about, you have 3 gut check questions that you ask yourself when you're evaluating founders. You said, would I trust this founder to execute my estate? Would I want to work for this founder? And would I want to work with this founder as a coworker? So I'm curious, what are some things that you look at in the conversations and the pitches that help you evaluate that?
Yeah, I think so. The first one starts with trust. Do you have just a really high level of trust with the person? And how trust is built and conveyed differs based on the founder types. Some founders, they're really open, they're empathic, they connect with you, and if that's fake, like hopefully you can suss that out. But when it's real, like that can often be a great signal. And then some founders are, they're tough. Like they're going to push you on every question you ask. They're going to, make you really question whether you like thought through the product and the deck a lot, and it makes you feel uncomfortable. And so, what you have to think is sort of the way that more aggressive founder style pushing, is that in good faith? Is that like, are they right? Are they right to push?
Sure.
And, that's a different trust question. But I think it starts with trust ultimately, in establishing some of those roles. When you're thinking about working for someone, I just think back to like, what are the qualities that I would want in a boss? You want someone who's fair. You want someone who hopefully has better experience, who has foresight, who's strategic, just the normal things that you want if you think back to like the best boss you've ever had or the best boss you could ever think of. Someone that drives and will push you, someone that's not going to let you become complacent. And then as a coworker, is this a person that, again, will pull their weight in the company? If you're on a team with that person and you guys had a really big project that you had to complete, like, would they be there? Would they make it happen? And it's interesting that how each of those sort of circles fit in to make a good founder, and like the Venn diagram of the founder that fits all three. It's not always the same recipe for each founder, but what I've seen is that if you ignore one of those circles, for me, it's always turned out poorly. Even if they were the smartest, like, best person that's most aggressive, that maybe would have done good in two of the categories, but is like a horrible boss or something. Like, it just hasn't worked out. But some founders can make it work for sure. I mean, when the Steve Jobs book came out, like, there was a whole wave of founders that were like not very friendly. Most of them should have been friendly, but they weren't friendly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Very helpful. What would you say is the long-term plan for Character Labs?
We're just going to keep doing it. I mean, we think it's been really successful, and it's just so fun to work with companies in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, just like for ourselves too, to block off the time on our calendar to just focus. So it's cool. Continuation, I guess, is the short story.
Yeah, that makes sense. Very cool. What would you say is your biggest pain point today?
Oh yeah. I think that one of the things that we focus on very heavily at Character is sort of trying to be like a truly excellent venture capital firm. And one of the things that I know is true for startups is that sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. And that's one of the biggest like impediments to your success. And so I think one of the things that keeps me up as a pain point is like, are there things that I'm missing on our firm development or our firm journey that would better propel us into being sort of that like rarefied air of like truly incredible VCs? And so I think that spending time and having time for some of those strategic thinking and just that thought is like a sort of tension point with executing on all the tactical things that we do as a firm. And so that's not like a super clear pain point, but that's something I think about.
Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense. One thing I got to hear about a bunch of them with the Y Combinator demos that you were talking about, but you had mentioned, or what would be one startup that you're most excited about, either a Character client currently or one of the ones you heard about recently?
Oh man. Our very first investment is a company called Phaedra, which is creating AI that helps autonomously run factories, all sorts of different factories. And two of the co-founders came out of Google DeepMind, and the third co-founder came out of this deep industrial technical background working at companies like Train. And I'm just so bullish about this company. They're doing really remarkable things. We invested before the AI hype because we were never really like sector or hype driven investors. And so it's really excellent team that's solving this huge pain point. So Phaedra is definitely like up there among all investments are your favorite child, right? But
Nice.
like they're favorite of the favorites.
Yeah. And did you were they part of Character Labs, or was this before Character Labs existed?
This was before Character Labs existed. And so within our fund, we have labs investments that we do for truly, truly early stage companies, closer to pre-seed. And then we have core seed investing. We're writing $500K to $1 million checks in seed stage companies. And so we invest in Phaedra as part of our core investments bucket.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Great. How do you ensure that each startup in your portfolio gets the necessary support?
Yeah. So again, good news is Jake and JZ like got this down to a team, to a T at GB. And so they have a very clear idea about scheduling. I think what we found though is that startups usually have like one sprint that maybe when we first invest that it's like clear, and sometimes we run that sprint immediately. Sometimes we find that there's a really long stretch, 6, 7, 8 months before they run a sprint. But what we're not finding is that companies want to run a sprint every month. And so that just gives us sort of a natural balance where we've sort of not felt stressed at all about executing on sprints when companies want it and when it makes sense, and not having too many.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Great. Do you, this was kind of a just curiosity question. Do you ever refer out sort of the leftovers, the startups that you decide not to
definitely.
to fund?
Yeah. And I would say that like the truth is venture investing is so humbling because the things that you think will go well, sometimes they don't. And then the companies that like you passed on for whatever reason, they can become absolute monsters. And so what we do is for companies that like we really liked, we often find that sometimes there's a stage issue. They're too early for labs, or we're not running labs. Maybe they're a half step beyond where we invest in seed, or they're just in an industry that we're not smart about. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that we just like we don't know, like we don't have a great perspective on, we don't have a great thesis on. We haven't invested in a ton of companies in the space. And so in those cases where we sort of know and trust founders, we definitely want to pass them along to other VCs. But it's never the case that like we would if we thought there was something like not great about the company that we'd want to share it. I mean, we just want, we want the quality to be very high, even if that means the quantity is low.
Yeah. Great. Sounds like a very sound way to approach it.
Hopefully. I think, our customers at the end of the day, we have basically two subsets. One is the LPs, and that's the reason we exist, which is to judiciously and as best as we can make them the greatest like ethical and legal return that we can through venture investing. And the second is the founder community. And I think that I just feel like a great deal of sort of like honor and respect that I get to work with smart people that have put so much on the line. And so like we try to treat all the founders we chat with and interact with a high degree of like respect, because ultimately, again, they're our customer. Like they should have a really good experience, even if we don't invest. So we think about that a lot.
Yeah, I really liked what you posted. It was something to the effect of, show up on time, and ready and give your attention to the founder when they're pitching, and just really liked that.
Yeah,
that mindset.
Totally. Like they spend their whole life, perhaps like, leading up to this, and then years of their career, like they felt so much pain. Like the least that you can do as an investor is like read the damn deck.
Yeah. It sounds like you have a good balance of like an empathetic approach, but you're able to look at it objectively at the same time.
We try to. Yeah.
That's great. Good. And so speaking of, you mentioned your LPs, you have around 100 LPs is what I was reading on the character website.
Yeah.
Are any of them involved in the day-to-day?
Not really. I mean, we've
Okay.
been truly fortunate with a really diverse set of former founders, local LPs, just all different types. And they're certainly very helpful when we ask, but none of them are sort of involved in the day-to-day operations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any, you mentioned that you, Jake, and JZ could just see, doing this forever. Do you have any like apprentices or people that you're kind of grooming to join you?
Not yet. So, I think we had a discussion about team, and inevitably team grows. But in the early days of a venture firm, I think the decision making and the processes that you put in place to make those initial decisions are very consequential in terms of compounding good decision making over the years. And so what we decided is that we're going to focus on refining that first, like getting it right to the nth degree that we can, and then in the future work on sort of scaling up from there. So,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I assume that you do have some sort of support staff today?
Nope. Just
really?
Yeah. No. Yeah. Nope. Just JZ and myself work full time, and then Jake increasingly is spending more and more time with us. So it's awesome. Yeah.
That's impressive.
We put our all into it too. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. You stated in one of your VC sub sites, which I was going to say you're being too modest. They're definitely insightful. But I know you like to call them sub sites. But you had just stated just recently. Well, actually, I think this was one of your old ones that was kind of reposted or early on in the process. But you mentioned it's better to hire. I think you're saying UX research, UXR consultant for a few sessions before a business coach. Could you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, so I've seen a rise in business coaches among our portfolio. I think all startup founders, and there's 100% a place for them because it's a tough journey. It's difficult to figure out all the different steps that you have to take and navigate and manage things. But I think that so much of the pain again gets back to product market fit. It gets back to figuring out, are you building the right thing for the right customers? And so like if that pain, is what you're experiencing in your startup, maybe better to like work with a great UXR person first. And like, maybe that solves a lot of your pain, and you don't need the business coach.
Yeah.
But like you probably will come away with something tangible in any event for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I agree strongly with that. At least in my Fortune 500 experience, we oftentimes were figuring out ways to be as efficient as possible. And I'd be looking at the feature and asking, well, how do we know that this is what our users really want, or that this is going to drive the business outcomes that we're looking for?
Precisely.
And this is kind of to test myself out a little bit. What comes to your mind when you hear early stage startup coach?
I mean, it sounds pretty transparent. I think it's pretty clear. I think what's clear to me from reading your posts and sort of what you're doing is, the unique role that you fulfill. I think that differentiating like coach from like consultant from like, quasi investor, like making it as sort of bright as possible in all your branding about like, these are the things that we actually do as a coach. I think that that's like super key to like the clarity that founders need to like quickly sort of like bucket you into what you're doing. It's clear, like,
okay.
I think what you're doing is great. So,
oh, good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. Yeah. I'm eating my own dog food, so to speak. So I'm trying to just test things out, and I've already adjusted kind of what I'm doing and how I'm branding myself a few times. And
Love it.
What you guys do at Character is a big part of following that and learning from it. So there's a lot of great people in the Twin Cities here in the startup community that
Totally.
been learning from very quickly.
Twin Cities is just great. Strong, used to be very strong in medical as well. I don't know if that's still the case.
Yep, definitely, with Mayo Clinic in Rochester,
Sure.
and then Medtronic, and
Yep.
lots of great med tech companies.
Yeah.
How would you say, if I were looking to learn the ropes of venture capital, what are the best places to start?
Well, I think that it's easiest to join an early stage startup that's just received funding from someone really good. I hope someday we're in that category, but like the risk adjusted return for the experience and the reps that you'll get if you join like a sub 10 person startup, and getting to interact with the VC, like that's probably an easier and better path than trying to like go an indirect route into VC, because one of the weird things is it's just not a huge industry. There's not a ton of people working in VC. And so you're sort of always up against just like the winds of fortune on like whether someone's hiring or not. And so it's like, I think it's better to sort of like be at a portfolio company where you get to interact with an investor. Like you'll probably get reps in faster and you'll probably make more money. I mean, my sister went to work for an early stage startup and she like, made way more money than I've ever made. So people should just do that. Like frustrating. Like I'm the finance guy. Why are you doing so well? So
that's funny. Oh, that's great. Well, to wrap up here, I had some kind of fun, just rapid fire questions.
Let's do it.
So favorite travel destination?
Oh man. Nice, France.
Okay.
Yeah.
Favorite food?
Lasagna.
Favorite movie?
Casablanca.
Favorite Flemish primitive?
Jan van Eyck, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
And lastly, favorite product?
Favorite product. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that's a really tough one. I'm just going to go with my laptop.
Okay.
It's a bad one, but
which is your laptop?
Favorite.
What product is your laptop? What type?
Just a MacBook Air. Love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Great. And then actually another one, since you're in Milwaukee, I have family in Milwaukee and go there since it's only 5.5 hours from the Twin Cities a lot. What's your favorite restaurant in the Milwaukee area?
Cafe Corazon. It's this Mexican place that's near where we live. It's amazing.
Okay.
But drop me a line next time you're in town. Like let's hang out.
Yeah, definitely. The other place, I don't know if you're into fast food at all, but Cops. We got to stop at Cops every time we come to Milwaukee. So
such a classic.
Yeah. I'll definitely look you up or let you know when I'm in town next time. That'd be great.
Sweet. And I mean, thanks so much for the chat today, Casey. And it's hopefully, you get something useful from this.
Oh, absolutely.
Just feel free to reach out like separately on anything that you want or want feedback on related to like branding or what you're working on.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for like your support as well. Like it's just like, it's super meaningful. So like, I really appreciate it. So, thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for taking the time and your generosity and offering your time, your insights, and just your support. I really appreciate it, Eli.
Likewise, man. See you sometime soon and have a great night.
Sounds good. You too.
Bye.
All right. Thanks.